Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Joel from Jonesy's, and this is part number 3 of our Camaro Restomod build. We got it back from the sandblaster. All the paint is stripped off. So let's see what we uncovered. Yeah, no huge surprises on the sandblast. Obviously we've got some rust repair patches that we need to do in the roof, as well as back around this rear glass section, but nothing too surprising there. There's some fine pinholes here that we should be able to fill pretty easily with some metal reinforced filler. This is probably the worst spot right over here on the passenger side. This is going to take quite a bit of metal work, but on the right rear quarter panel, we uncovered a not so professional patch job over here. There you guys can see it's not fully welded, and they just basically lapped the patch on top of the base metal. And then also there's a dent. You can see this dent right through here. And then they used, back in the day, they would just put sheet metal screws in there and pop those dents out, and then not fill those dent holes with metal. They would just put body filler in there. So we're gonna cut this. We'll buy a new quarter here, and we'll cut this piece right here, and then replace this whole section and fully weld it in. So that'll be a better repair. We did uncover a little bit of rust over here on the passenger side, right near where the window goes on the dash, but all in all, not too bad. The floor pans turned out really nice. Didn't uncover anything surprising in there, but looks really good. So now we have turned the corner, and now stuff is going to start to look really, really nice. So let's go over and show you what we've got going on. Run our first batch of parts in epoxy primer, as well as the polyester. So we'll start with the door here. You can see we have the jambs taped off because we don't want a lot of material build to go on the jambs. So we only want the high build to be on the surfaces that we're gonna body work and we're gonna smooth out. We've also eliminated all of the trim along that center belt line for the doors. Sprayed the fenders as well, did a little bit of hammer and dolly work up here on the front of this passenger fender, but the fenders themselves actually look pretty good. So the process after you get it back from the sandblaster is you clean, and then you sand the surface so that it can be smoother, so that you can clean it again. Because right now, right out of the sandblaster, the surface finish is too rough and you can't effectively clean it with the solvents and with the paper towels and the white balls that we use. Here's the hood. Hood uncovered some kind of weird stuff. There's some protruding dents right there and there, which we don't understand. But the hood's relatively straight. It does have a little bit of wave right there in the middle, but that's to be expected because this is a really pretty big panel. This kind of gives you an idea of what the surface finish needs to be after sandblast. So we've scuffed all this up so that it can be completely cleaned and wiped. Now this piece itself was replaced at one time, and when they replaced it, they had the emblem, the LT emblem was on the passenger side, and it needs to be relocated over to the driver's side. So we're going to position those holes and get that drilled before it goes any farther in the bodywork process. So the plan moving forward is we're going to get all of the rust repair fixed on this and get the whole body sealed up in black epoxy primer and put high build on the exterior surfaces that need to be body worked. And then we will use a single stage satin on the firewall and inside onto the floor pan and into the trunks, and then use undercoating underneath, and then that'll be done. At that point, we'll take the body and we'll go ahead and mount it on the subframe. So here you guys can see we have been really cranking through a lot of the mock-up. We have the dash section painted the satin black. The firewall is painted satin black. The underside has all been sealed with epoxy primer, and the undercoat, the interior, all this section right in here has been coated with epoxy primer. And we kind of had to go a little bit out of order on some of the operations because after we got everything back from the sandblaster, the roof was just too badly pitted, and it's just too thin. So that meant we needed to order a complete roof skin, which I have over on the floor, which we'll go through. And then also we ordered a new rear quarter. And as a lesson and a tip for everybody, you guys can see that big dent right there. Make sure you inspect your freight and contact the supplier so that you aren't paying for damaged pieces. So we got everything back from the sandblaster, and it's very important to go ahead and get everything sealed up in epoxy primer as soon as possible so that you don't get a lot of flash rusting. On top of that, you can also tell that we have sealed in epoxy as well as done the rough body work on the doors, fenders, and we have this kind of rough mocked up so that we can set all of our gaps right here and there, as well as this main body line. Now, this is all just kind of rough in because we don't have the subframe. So some of these gaps for this fender as well as the door is gonna change a little bit once we put the subframe in. So we're probably not gonna do the final block on all these panels until we actually bolt that subframe in correctly. So next step is we are going to measure and cut the roof skin out and get the quarter panel done. But before that, we have to double check to make sure that our reproduction replacement skin matches in measurements, and that will determine exactly how we do the installation. So I'm gonna pull a tape measure on this and we'll see how it measures out. Hopefully you guys can see that. It is just a little bit less than 52 1/4. 52 9/16. So if we were to install the new skin the way that they, and when I say they, the reproduction people are intending, you would have a seam right here. It would replace this window reveal, and where the drip edge is, you would have to bend and fold this piece under. You would also have to drill out all of the spot welds along here, reposition every single one of these trim hangers, as well as take out all of the original lead that's in this section and put that back in. So what we are actually going to do, knowing that the replacement panel is actually short, we're going to actually seam this and weld the whole thing in, and we'll come off of this edge. We want to stay as tight to this factory seam as we can because that bend will allow us to weld this in with less chance of warping. So we're actually going to be cutting, we'll stay above the lead. So we'll actually cut this all along here and all along there. That way, dimensionally, none of the window openings change. It's gonna be a lot of welding. We're gonna have to take our time on welding all that stuff so that we don't warp the heck out of the roof. So sit back, grab a beverage, and watch us work. So this video is quickly turning into kind of a how-to. You can see I've chalked out some cut lines, and I've put the cut line really close to this edge on the front and close to that edge on the back. And all I did was take my chalk and followed that edge. And you want these lines to be as straight as possible so that when you use a cutoff wheel like this on an angle grinder, it will, it's easier to cut a straight line. And so over here on the side, we're gonna cut this piece. This is where the lead goes. We're gonna cut this piece straight all the way to the front. That way we won't have to mess around with this compound curve that goes into that windshield frame. And we can stay away from the lead right here. And then once we have this whole section cut out, it, in theory, will sit really nicely on top, and we can line up exactly where the cut lines are gonna need to be. So you can see, like right in here, it's gonna get relatively close. So that contour of our new roof should fit and match this contour really well. So now we have the roof skin positioned exactly where we want. We're using actually tape, just some regular painter's tape to put right on the edge. And the reason we use painter's tape instead of just using regular chalk pencil or something like that is that this will be a lot easier to see that edge. And we know we're gonna bring the cutoff wheel right up against the edge of that tape. And that should give us a really, really, really nice gap through here. So once we get it all completely taped, get all of our lines taped, and we're purposely adding the tape a little bit tight because it's always easier to grind and remove some materials to get this to fit really well versus having to add more material in it. So we're tracing the top skin with masking tape. Then after that, we'll peel this off and I'll show you what the next step is. Here you can see we are cutting the old roof panel off from the existing substructure. And if you'll notice, we left some of those little rectangular tabs. And the purpose of those tabs is to help support the new roof panel right at our weld seam while we're doing the test fit. Eventually, we will cut those off so we can have a full butt weld all the way across the roof panel. So after we cut the old roof out, we have our new roof panel in, and essentially what we've done is we've got this seam tight so that it's flush right up against it, and we have this seam. Basically what you want to do is you want to get two of your seams as good as you can, and then what will happen is that over here on this side, hopefully you can zoom in, you can see we have an overlap. So we're gonna need to trim more so that this fits. And you can't push the new panel up, because what will happen if you do that is that you will establish a hump and you'll put a crown in your roof. And we don't want that. We want this all to sit down flush. You can see, like, I push it down and it's perfect. And you don't want it to be in any kind of tension. You don't want this crown of this roof to be in any kind of tension. So we've got two sides lined up great, that side and then the driver's side. And now we're gonna mark the roof section again and cut it again so that this top piece will fit in here without any kind of overlap. So here you can see this corner, there's some overlap. And then as you go along the front windshield seam, it's still overlapped, but then when you get down to that end, hopefully you can kind of see you don't. So it goes from fitting really well there to overlap, 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 overlap here, and then overlap all the way along the passenger side. So we'll go ahead and mark this and then trim the actual roof panel to fit the top skin so that this top skin fits nicely without any kind of forced crown. Here's a good picture of what the underside of the roof looks like. You can see there's no primer here, so we're gonna get some primer. We'll spray some primer in there. And we have the hole cut really well. We've deburred the edges. Now, one tip, whenever you're working with sheet metal and you need to grind, the rule is you don't grind like this. Even when we take the paint off, we'll use a wire wheel, or we'll use something that's not nearly as aggressive as an actual sanding disc. And when you sand and you grind these, you want to make sure that you're grinding perpendicular so that you're not making this edge any thinner than it already is, because you want as much material thickness on the edge here as you can so that it holds the weld better. So we've gone ahead and smoothed this stuff out just by running this 90-degree die grinder just right along there like that. We will put a piece of sound deadener right back in here in the center section. That's how the factory had. And then on top of all of these spots, we're gonna use a panel bonding adhesive. And so we'll dollop panel bonding adhesive on all of these spots. And then we'll go ahead and we'll set the roof skin on top of that panel bonding adhesive. And the purpose of that is to prevent, when you have the windows down or anything like that, it prevents the roof from shaking like that. So we'll actually glue the roof down to this main support structure, which will stiffen it up. It'll also maintain that arch and that curve that it already has. And then after that stuff has set up, we will go along and very, very slowly and very meticulously weld all of these seams in so that we don't warp it. Here is the final test fit. You guys can see the gaps that we're working with. Everything is coming together. Lots of cutting, grinding, test fitting, pulling it up with magnets. What we generally do is I try to use tape. You put tape on the areas where you need to adjust the gap. And then you can easily grind up to the edge of the tape. That's kind of another little tip. Here you can see in the back, like where you cut, like you're never gonna get it absolutely perfect, but this is pretty darn close. You can see as we've got a little bit of flex here. Now, the goal is to have the roof sitting on the structure underneath where we're gonna put the bonding adhesive, and you want it to be relaxed. You don't want any of this stuff to be in a bind. Now, sections over here where the gap is a little bit too big, generally, and I'll show you, there's a little trick where you can use a little bit of solid filler wire to put in that gap, and then when you come by and spot it, it will fill that gap really, really well, and you won't have any issues. So here, you can kind of see our Sharpie marks. This is up a little bit, but once it comes down to be welded, that's the gap. These Sharpie marks indicate where we needed to kind of do some fine tuning on the gaps here. And I'm zoomed way in. Like if you were here in person, you'd say, wow, those gaps are really good. So we have everything fit, and the actual roof skin itself isn't bowed. It's following the contours of the existing window frames really well. So next step is we're going to dollop bonding adhesive in there. We're gonna put a piece of sound deadener in the middle that's got a foil back right where the dome light goes on the inside. Here we have gone ahead and sealed up the underside of the roof panel, and we have also sanded right along the edges to where this is clean. And we are ready now to put the bonding adhesive, dollop all that on top of where the original one was, neutralized all that rust, and then we also added in a piece of foil-backed sound deadener on the underside of the roof panel to mimic the original insulation piece that they had in that spot. Here we are installing the panel bonding adhesive. We're just putting some right where the existing panel bonding adhesive was that General Motors put in from the factory. Then after we get all of those set, we are going to set the new panel on and secure it kind of temporarily in place with some magnets. Push it down in the middle to kind of squeeze out all of that bonding adhesive. Hook up the ground clamp on the welder, and then when we start to weld this together, you'll notice we're going to start in the middle of the seams and work out towards the corners. This is so that as the panel expands and it pushes, it won't cause a buckle in the panel. Basically, if you start at a corner and you go to the middle, then the panel doesn't have any place to go. It doesn't have any gap to fill. So we spot weld probably about every 6 inches and working our way around, never in any one spot. And this helps have 2 people. One person can spot and the other person can use the air blowgun and cool off the weld so that we don't warp it. Again, always just moving around the panel so you're not putting too much heat in any certain area. Here we had one section where the actual gap we ground a little bit too much, and so what I do is I take a little piece of welding filler material, TIG welding rod, and you just kind of fit that into the gap, and then take your MIG welder and you spot it to secure it, and then you kind of push the weld filler rod into the crack itself and spot it some more, and this just makes it so that you don't have to put as much MIG filler material into that crack and it's filled with solid metal instead of trying to fill it. Now we just cut the end off with a cutoff wheel, push it down with a pair of welding pliers to get it all flushed out really well, secure it in place, and then you can finish weld this out exactly the way we did for the rest of the panel. So here is what the final weld out looks like. You can see all of those spots in there. The trick is when you weld this piece in, you want to make sure you move around the whole entire roof and never concentrate in one spot. You just spot it with the welder, blow it with compressed air, and away you go. So hopefully you guys can see we did not warp it. It is a little wavy, but that's to be expected anytime you weld. And so we'll clean up these welds and put filler material on it and smooth it all out, and it will be 100% ready to go for the vinyl top. Here's an update on the rear quarter. You can see that we haven't actually ground all of these welds smooth yet. And you need to take care when you're grinding these welds because you don't want to build up a lot of heat from the grinder. So long passes with the sanding disc to get that stuff smoothed out. Always have a blowgun nearby so that those welds can get smoothed out and you don't warp the actual panel from your grinding. If you've made it this far and you haven't warped it from your welding, you definitely don't want to cut any corners or get into a rush and warp the panel from your grinding. So, well, here we are ready to go ahead and put the subframe back under the body. So engine and transmission are all ready to go along with the subframe, and here you can see the shifter relocation we got from Sickie. It measures 28.5 inches from the mounting surface of the bell housing to the shift handle. which when we were doing our mock-up, we determined, you guys can hopefully see we got a couple of tech screws right there in the transmission tunnel. Those indicate where we're gonna have to cut the hole for that shifter to come up through. And we're gonna lift the body up, and then we'll roll the subframe underneath, get it lined up, and get it bolted directly to the body. This way we can put the front core support in, and that will secure and maintain and set all of the gaps for the front fender as well as the back of the door, and we won't need to worry about any of that stuff moving or shifting while we're doing body work. That's going to wrap up this video. It turned into kind of a long one, and it also turned into a how-to because we put that roof skin on. But as you can see, we have everything masked off now. Subframe is installed permanently, and it is time to start the long and tedious process of sand, prime, sand, prime, sand, prime, all the way through the end of it. So if you guys like this video, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, and thanks for watching.